Many years ago, I started working for my father. My father was a meat cutter by profession, and towards the end of his career, he started a retail butcher shop, if you will. And while I was going to school, I worked for him for about 4 years, 5 years, and I learned that profession. But more importantly, I learned how to deal with people on a one-to-one basis, and I think it was a very important element of my career, even though I was very young at that time. As I graduated from my undergraduate degree and completed a business curriculum at Cal State Northridge, it was about the height of the Vietnam War. And I decided at that time, instead of going to work, instead of going to war, that I would pursue a graduate degree in business, which I did and completed. And after that, I took my very first job, which was really not a very organized process by me. At that time, the U.S. economy was in doldrums. Interest rates were close to 20%. Unemployment was not double digits, but 7 to 8%, and a pretty difficult time in the U.S. economy. And I took a job for Hughes Aircraft Company. I worked there for about 1 year, and while it was my first experience in U.S. corporate business, it really wasn't to my liking. It's not what I wanted to do. I moved from Hughes Aircraft to a small publicly held semiconductor company located in Southern California. And this was at the advent of semiconductor technology. Actually, the company I worked for tested semiconductor parts. So we were really on the leading edge. I worked there for about 6 years. And then at that time, I was a little more logical in my pursuit of my career and where I wanted to go. And I started reading about companies that were interesting, that were capable and advanced. And I got very focused on the Japanese. And at that time, this is about the 1980s, the Japanese economy was growing leaps and bounds, and the many Japanese companies were renowned for their manufacturing capability. And I decided that I would seek out a Japanese company and get the benefit of their expertise. Also at that time, I would say the Japanese companies were renowned for their forward thinking, for their strategic planning, and many of the U.S. companies were criticized for short-term thinking and running their company by share price appreciation as opposed to long-term view of the world. It so happens at that time, Toshiba Corporation, a very large Japanese company, probably will have sales turnover of near $70 billion for their fiscal year end 2007, decided to start manufacturing in the U.S. And I joined that company. I joined one of their companies, a subsidiary called Toshiba America Information Systems, in 1983. And I joined as their controller and worked up through the company over 22 years as CFO of that corporation, and then spinning off from that corporation in 1999, a subsidiary called Toshiba America Business Solutions, where I was the president and CEO for 6 years. And that's a brief synopsis of my career. Toshiba America Business Solutions, or as we refer to it, TABS, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Toshiba Corporation, and we have responsibility for the imaging marketplace in the Americas. And TABS is a full-line company in that we're responsible for software development, manufacture, wholesale distribution, and also retail distribution of imaging products and information workflow products and services. When we talk about mission statements, we always like to talk about a context for those mission statements. So I'll start with a vision statement for our company, which is to be recognized by our customers as industry leaders, challenge the status quo, and provide superior performance. Within that context, which can change due to the competitiveness of the marketplace and changes in society from time to time, our mission statement is to always exceed our customers' expectations by providing leading-edge imaging and information workflow products and services while meeting the commitments of our shareholders, our employees, and the community. I think first we have to start with our parent company. Toshiba Corporation is approximately a $70 billion company with expertise on the small end of the scale, microcircuit semiconductor parts, and on the high-end nuclear power plant construction. So we have a wide range of capabilities, including medical equipment development and sale, as well as consumer products. And across all of those products and services is a common thread of technology. And that technology provides a significant competitive advantage to TABS in the imaging business because we can funnel that technology into the latest products and services. I think the second point that provides a competitive advantage is that Toshiba is truly a global company. As the president and CEO of TABS, and running a company that's responsible for the Americas, most of my employees are U.S. Or Latin American citizens. But we're working in a Japanese company. And the wisdom that Toshiba has utilized is recognizing that we know our marketplace is probably better than they do. While we do have some Japanese expatriates on our staff, basically the company is an American company. And I think those two key threads, if you will, provide a competitive advantage to many of our Japanese competitors here in the U.S. Yes. As an American, we are so lucky. The language of the business world is English. And those of us who speak English as a first language are, very fortunate. We have a huge advantage to begin with. In dealing with other cultures, I think that Americans have to be aware that while we're a large country, at least in economic terms, we have to be aware of other people's cultures. And I think probably some of my American colleagues who have not done well working for multinational companies probably weren't as sensitive or as patient as they could have been to progress. I've worked for Toshiba for over 22 years, and I see probably two things that allowed me my level of success with that company. One is that generally I'm a patient person and a good listener. Two, I was fortunate enough to be mentored by excellent people, excellent people from Toshiba Corporation who took me under their wing and explained the culture of Toshiba to me. And I was patient enough to listen and to learn from them, and it helped me greatly in my career. Whereas some of my colleagues maybe didn't have that patience, or maybe didn't have the luck of being associated with some of the people that I had at Toshiba that taught me how to operate within Toshiba's culture. The imaging business was actually invented, we'll call it copying business, first of all. It was actually invented in the early 1950s by Xerox Corporation. And they were the world leaders of that technology for about 30 years. And it was a analog business, basically copiers with a photo technology coupled with mechanical systems that managed paper flow. In the late 90s, the advent of digitalization completely changed the landscape for copying, and a term called imaging was coined. And with that was a collision between the traditional copier makers, led by Xerox, but dominated by Japanese manufacturers such as Canon, Ricoh, and Toshiba. A collision with the traditional printer businesses, which had always been digital because of the advent of desktops and as the output device for computers. So even before the internet, copier manufacturers had to struggle with the huge change of moving to digitalization. So a digital image, the output is exactly the same as an analog copier. It's basically black spots on a white piece of paper. And customers, while they may appreciate the technology, they really want a quality copy at a low price with a reliable machine. So as copiers and printer manufacturers came together in this war, everyone has had to deal with that change or simply fade from the scene. And it's one of the strengths of Toshiba is our great technology background helped us climb this mountain and be able to compete with the printer manufacturers. The internet has provided another challenge for the imaging business, and that is how to distribute information. It's less about the box and more about delivering information timely and reliably with a high quality at a reasonable price. At TABS and for myself, we've identified 7 key attributes or values that we try to operate by every day. And the very first one is customers. Customers have to be placed at the very pinnacle of your company's perspective. And customer satisfaction has to be your #1 goal. Without customers, you can develop the greatest product, the greatest services, but if there's no one there to enjoy the benefit of that product or the service, you really won't have a business. So you always have to keep customers in the forefront. Additionally, integrity is one of the values that we practice every day, and I think it could never be more important than it is today. It saddens me greatly when we hear of the issues that have gone on in companies like Enron or Global Crossing, and it's that disrespect for integrity and principles that just should never be allowed. And Toshiba and TABS and myself believe that integrity is one of the highest principles that, or values that we strive to operate under every day as we conduct business. Another important value is people. And we believe that you should encourage your colleagues. You should help them to improve their own capabilities and to challenge themselves and to take risks without fear of being looked at as not competent. For without taking those steps, those challenges, you won't grow. Quality is also a very important value for us. In every product and every service, we believe that we should deliver products that please our customers, are reliable, and offer the best value proposition in the marketplace. Another value for us is innovation, and this is linked to understanding that change is a constant. And if you're not able to innovate, you just simply won't be able to survive in today's business environment. In addition to innovation is agility, because as those changes come about, you have to be able to adapt, to change your business model, still focus on your customer, but be able to compete and add value to what your customer's requirements are. And maybe the last attribute for value for us is performance. We believe you should set the standard high and constantly try to improve upon your performance. And what goes along with that is being measured, or transparency. We believe that you need to state what you're going to accomplish and then also measure your performance against that accomplishment, as opposed to saying a bunch of words. I watched a news broadcast this morning, and Warren Buffett was being interviewed. And he's a very interesting person because he speaks plain English and he does what he says. While you may not agree with his strategy or his focus, he's transparent. And it's too easy to say that your goal is to do Y and then massage the information or the numbers to say that you've accomplished Y when you really haven't. So performance would be our last attribute. I think the first thing you have to do to achieve a high level of customer satisfaction is to understand your customers. You have to listen to them, and you have to meet with them, and you have to understand what their issues are. In the TABS business model, we sell on a wholesale basis to independent business people, and at the same time we also are retailers ourselves. In some sense, we compete in some markets with our customers. But you can manage that. The marketplace is a huge marketplace, and we've found very little conflict if you treat your customers right, properly, and fairly. But our ability to be in the retail part of the value chain for delivering imaging products and services allows us to understand what our customers need firsthand. And I think understanding that and then acknowledging that it should be your most important goal is to satisfy your customers, that's probably half of the battle. The latter half is equally important, and that is you have to perform. You actually have to deliver that customer satisfaction. So understanding by listening and being in the shoes of your customer, and then secondly, having the commitment that satisfying your customer is really important. And then lastly, doing what you said you were going to do, performing. Toshiba is a Six Sigma company, and one of the basis premises of Six Sigma is to be able to measure processes and capabilities. And many times you will establish a goal and you'll do everything that you can to achieve that goal, and for various reasons it won't be achieved. And I think what happens then is you have to step back and you have to look at the reasons why you didn't achieve the goal. And sometimes this leads you to the conclusion that the goal may not have been appropriate, it's possible, or that you have to make adjustments in your approach in trying to achieve that goal. And actually setting a high goal and not achieving it is not necessarily a failure. It can be a tremendous learning experience. Of course, if every goal that you set you fail to achieve, there's another problem that has to be addressed. But not achieving a goal can be a very positive experience, one that you can grow your employees and also understand their strengths and weaknesses and really improve your own capabilities. Probably the financial aspects of management have always come easy to me. My education has been in financial management and accounting, and it came naturally to me. I enjoy mathematics, so I have always gravitated. It was probably my comfort zone is the financial part. I would also add probably the area that is the most difficult for me as I've matriculated to a CEO has been crisis management. And you might not think that people plan for crises, but crises happen. They're sometimes exogenous or outside of your control. And it may be one of the most important management capabilities that a CEO needs is how to manage a crisis when it presents itself. Because during that time you can lose the company, and you have to be able to quickly understand what the situation is, stabilize, and then move forward. And while there are many courses for accounting and human resources and information technology, I think the training for crisis management is probably lacking, and it's a variable that's hard to predict. So you have to be prepared for it. If not specifically, you mentally have to be prepared that a crisis can happen, and how are you going to handle it, and handle it in a calm manner that brings about, immediately brings about stabilization, or at least as fast as you can accomplish that. I think that there are a number of crises that can happen. Let's call them physical phenomena, a power outage, that you can take steps for disaster recovery for your IT system. And I think those are, in my sense of the word crisis, fairly primitive in that they can be expected to happen, and you can take necessary precautions. The area of crisis that is, I think, the most difficult is the one that doesn't have a pattern, that's unpredictable, one that's not been faced by your competitors. I think probably the most important way to prepare for that is to be aware of your business in its entirety, not just one attribute such as sales or another attribute such as profit, but to be aware of all the feedback systems that you have and monitor them. A crisis usually raises its head very quickly, and what do you do in a crisis situation? Maybe that's the first question. Do you have a means of gathering your team and understanding what that crisis is quickly and responding to it? You may not have a cookbook approach to how to deal with that crisis because you may not know what that crisis is. But if you have a process in place, you will be better served and be able to deal with it much quicker. And I think maybe what's important is to recognize that crises can happen, and you have to be prepared your management team has to be prepared for them. That's a very interesting question. I'm going to modify it slightly from management to leadership. But I was fortunate enough to, many years ago, to read an article by a very intelligent business professor. His name is Charles Handy, and he used to be at the London School of Business. And he identified 3 attributes that good leaders have in common. And I'd like to think that I have tried to follow or lead up to Professor Handy's attributes, because I believe in them strongly. The attributes are a belief in oneself, a passion for the job, and also a love of people. It's important to understand these or put them in context, but to have a belief in oneself, you need to have that to have the self-confidence to lead people and take them into places they have not been. And without that, you won't be able to do that. At the same time, you also have to have some humility. You have to be able to recognize you may not have the answer all the time and be able to listen to your colleagues. The second attribute, a passion, is required to develop the energy and the focus to lead people and set an example for your colleagues. At the same time, you also have to have an awareness of other worlds, if you will. Good leaders read, they meet people, they have other experiences so that they don't live in a world with blinders or inside a box. And the third one, a love of people, is also, I think, a very interesting attribute or characteristic for good leaders. You know, the business world is a community of individuals, and certainly leaders that either don't care for people or believe people are a nuisance, they can command or lead by and gain respect, but people will not willingly follow those types of leaders. On the other hand, leaders have to have a capacity for aloneness. Many times a leader must walk alone. They cannot share their biggest worries. And leaders have to have the capacity to live vicariously through the success of their subordinates and be able to praise them many times for accomplishments that they themselves would like. But I think Professor Handy has, at least for myself, identified 3 attributes that I think good leaders should always have. And again, that belief in oneself, a passion for the job, and a love of people are absolute requirements for good leaders. I would have to say it was my own self-confidence. And as I grew up, I realized I'm basically an introvert by nature. To some extent, leadership requires an extrovert personality. And it was difficult in my younger years when I didn't have experience. I did not have tremendous successes, but slowly but surely, by taking small steps, one builds their confidence and gains from that. You gain a certain inner strength. And that probably would have been, if I look back at my career, would be probably one of the biggest challenges that I faced. What I have gravitated to probably in the last 10 years of my career is waking early. So I'm a 4 a.m. person, and that time is very precious to me. I use it for two things. I use it to physically exercise, and for whatever reason, that has a calming effect upon me. So in the quiet of the morning after I've exercised rigorously, I can think the best. When I show up to the office, I'm prepared for work that day in whatever time zone I'm at, and I'm also prepared for other components of my company that may be in other time zones. I'm awake and I'm invigorated. I also am a great believer in keeping task lists. I get great satisfaction by not only putting a task on my personal task list, but I get even more satisfaction by checking that off. And while my time is occupied to a great extent in the evenings because of customers and business meetings, I also try to practice going to bed at a reasonable hour. I don't require a huge amount of sleep, but I find that what's worked for me is getting up early, exercising, working, and then getting a good night's sleep. It's interesting. Someone should do a study on this, but when you're in graduate school, you end up, at least I did, I ended up studying at night. So you end up being a night owl and then not a morning person, but then you get into the work environment and you have to adapt. You have to make that change because the clock is different. At least I found it different for me. You know, we live in an age of technology, and certainly email, well, I guess I should say telephone, email, BlackBerry, text messaging is all the rage. And I may be old school, but clearly my preference is face-to-face contact. As advanced as those communication technologies are, they have not yet been able to capture the experience you have in a one-to-one relationship by looking into someone's face and their eyes, their body language. Communication is a process of not just talking, but also listening and being observant to what the other person is experiencing, and then adjusting the way you respond to that person. Unfortunately, when you're using the technological means of communication, it's hard to get that feedback and understand what the other person is feeling or thinking. When you think about it, communication is not just hearing yourself talk. You're really trying to understand what the other person is thinking and getting across to them. So for me, in my approach, I've always been more effective and much more comfortable with achieving what I wanted to do by talking face to face with people. I think the largest advantage is the breadth of knowledge or awareness of many disciplines. In business today, there is a great compression going on to bring about efficiency and cost advantages for businesses. And as that happens, management teams become smaller and smaller, and they have to be able to add value to the organization in several different ways. So most young people, when they come into an organization, usually are specialists. They're usually hired in as accountants or HR professionals or IT professionals or marketing or sales, because that's where they have been trained generally. But more and more, I think companies are looking for people who are well-rounded and who can provide, if not experience, can provide capability and knowledge in several disciplines. And I think that's where probably the biggest advantage that MBAs can provide to the workforce and why they would be valued. With that said, I think MBAs have to be patient. I think they have to prove that they can add value to the company before they will be valued for their breadth of knowledge. individuals set goals for themselves to be the president, or to earn a certain amount of money, or be successful. And I'm sure I have modified my goals over time to reflect the experiences I have had. But as I look back now, probably my goals have been to be the best that I can be. It's a recognition of your capabilities, but it's also a recognition of your limitations. Probably I can't be the world's fastest runner, and I recognize that. But understanding that limitation, I can still be the best at whatever I choose to do. And that has been first and foremost of my goals. I've also had a goal that I will never be outworked. I think society has changed quite a bit. When I was younger, I think I had a competitive advantage against many of my colleagues because I had a graduate degree, and my father taught me to work hard, because if I didn't work hard, he wouldn't let me live at home. So I had to work very hard. But it taught me a very valuable lesson. And that combination of having a graduate degree and working hard and being fair gave me competitive advantage. I think the landscape today for young people is much different. I think it's much more competitive. Openers are having a graduate degree, and I think everyone has to work hard. So it's very difficult for younger people to differentiate themselves today. But I think it's important to understand what your limitations are, and then to set high goals for yourself, and then try to achieve them as best you can. And when you've given your best effort, it's okay. You can be satisfied with that. This goes back to an attribute that my father taught me. And he's a product of the Depression here in the U.S. in the 30s and 40s. And he always taught me that hard work was a tremendous attribute. And it's something that I've always had. I've always been able to work hard. It's interesting, if I contrast my experiences working for a Japanese company, Japan rode the backs of what is known as the salaryman. And the salaryman is an individual who made a tremendous commitment to his company